Well, welcome everybody to the inaugural Richard D. McLellan Prizes for advancing free speech and expression. Woo! Thank you everyone for braving the elements and coming out tonight. Life and weather are both unpredictable. We had to make some adjustments as a result, but our program is intact and we're ready for a memorable evening. To begin, I invite Senator Thomas Albert, who represents Michigan's 18th Senate District, to give the invocation. He will be followed by Judge James Ho, who is Circuit Judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit and a member of the McLellan Prize jury, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thomas?
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to come together and spend this evening in fellowship with friends and loved ones. We thank you not only for the life we receive through you, but also for the gift of free will. We recognize that this freedom of conscience is manifest chiefly in our speech, and that this precious freedom is necessary for every individual. We thank you for the exceptional efforts undertaken to defend this gift of free speech by leaders who have come before us, the leaders among us tonight, and the leaders that are yet to come. Help us to honor those who have had the courage to do what is right in the face of adversity, and please give strength to those who will need to do the same in the future. Most of all, Lord, give us the grace to use this freedom in conformity with your will, and to remember that our freedom is most secure when it is used to glorify you. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Please stand.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, with this evening's free speech celebration, the Russell Kirk Center's program year is coming to a close. Next weekend, we hold our last conference of the year when the Mitch McConnell Center at the University of Louisville and its student fellows gather at the Kirk Library in Mecosta. The Kirk Center will have held 36 educational events this calendar year, the most in its history. All of our programs aim to recover, conserve, and enliven those enduring norms and principles that Russell Kirk called the permanent things. I'd like to share just a few highlights of our 2024 educational program. We continued a series of now 5 seminars with state legislators and county chairs to secure the foundations of their core political principles, discussing the best of American conservative thought and the connections between first principles, history, statesmanship, and public policy. Senator Albert, along with State Representative Brad Paquette, who wasn't able to be with us because of the snow, but former Representative Andrew Fink is here with us tonight, and each of them has been a key to helping us make that program a success. Thank you. Our annual intellectual retreats for interns of the Acton Institute and the Mackinac Center were terrific this year, highlighted by a debate recreation between the Federalist and Anti-Federalist sides of a very important conservative debate. Students just love those debates, those founding debates. We took our Kirk on Campus program to Hope College and Calvin University, featuring political economist Sam Gregg. And we hosted Harvard's influential John Adams Society for a political philosophy retreat at the Kirk Center. We welcome research visitors to the center by journalists and scholars from China, Japan, Great Britain, Hungary, Argentina, and Spain. All those countries from all over the world in our little village of Mecosta. Only in Michigan. We also work closely with several national networks of classical Christian schools, notably with the Circe Institute, who have representatives here tonight, which awards their annual Russell Kirk Paideia Prize to the best classical Christian school teacher in the country every year. Next fall, we launch our School of Conservative Studies. In addition to our introductory and intermediate course offerings and related programs, we were recently approved to offer a fully accredited certificate in conservative studies, the very first of its kind, that will also lead to an accredited master's. Earlier this year, we opened our new Grand Rapids business office in the 50 Lewis building, and we're committed in that way to making the Kirk Center more of a presence in West Michigan. In Mecosta, we began work with an architect affiliated with the famous Notre Dame School of Architecture to develop a site plan for the development of our village campus of 10 buildings. But the Kirk Center's major initiative this year is, of course, the McLellan Prizes. A lot of work went into the many elements that made up this prize program, like this one. We announced it publicly last December at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, and now it is a privilege to hold the inaugural event in Michigan in this historic and beautiful hotel and this beautiful ballroom. It's always a little extra special to be part of a first. Firsts are milestones. The McLellan Prizes are a milestone in the history of free speech, one of our core civil liberties. Together we gather to appreciate and celebrate the central importance of America's free speech tradition. This evening we will make history and present the largest free speech prize ever awarded, $50,000 to Greg Lukianoff for his contributions to advancing free speech and expression. Greg has heroically challenged the destructive effects of cancel culture. He has pointed to better ways to establish civil, engaging discourse. As we will hear tonight, he has thought deeply about how to short-circuit cancel culture and move toward a free speech culture. Free speech is once again politically controversial on the left and on the right. The McLellan Prizes aim at showing a better way forward. For as Sir Roger Scruton said, free speech is not the cause of the tensions that are growing around us, but the only possible solution to them. The McLellan Prizes seek the creators, the communicators, the optimists, the artists, the problem solvers. Over time, McLellan Prize winners will contribute to the tapestry of ideas that are central to the best values of the American civil social tradition. Our dream is that in a decade or two from now, as we add educational and communication elements to this program, we will look back to this evening as the foundation for the main McLellan Prize, having obtained a reputation as being akin to the Pulitzer Prize for free speech. Before moving into the program, I want to thank our sponsors who made this evening possible. Richard D. McLellan, J.C. and Tammy Heisinger, John and Michelle Engler, friends of the Russell Kirk Center who chose to be anonymous, Craig and Emily Weirda, Dick and Betsy DeVos Family Foundation, Bob Roth, Advancing American Freedom, the Ciceronian Society, the Circe Institute, Cyberlink ASP Technology, Inc., the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, Richard Baird, and Paul and Jackie Kleinhexel. Thank you again for making this evening possible. Now, before asking Governor John Engler to come to the stage, let's hear from Richard McLellan himself, followed by the 46th governor of the state of Michigan and the vice chair of the Russell Kirk Center, John Engler.
It's all about ideas. The Kirk Center is about ideas. Freedom of expression is about ideas. And if we can create a prize to award somebody who creates something in the area of liberty, First Amendment, freedom of expression generally, and if it incents people to write and think and articulate ideas in the area of freedom of expression, we need to identify those people and give them an attaboy. Say, we need more of this.
Well, Richard McLellan is a brilliant lawyer. He's been a major influence in Lansing for 30, 40 years now. He was very important to my administration because, as a good friend, I asked him to head the transition when I became governor. And so he's always been interested in free speech and freedom of expression. He's been a great defender of the corporate speech as well.
I care about free speech. You have to fight for it all the time. And I want the McLellan Prize to be one little piece of that constant struggle to preserve freedom of expression.
The McLellan Prize will recognize an individual, an entity, a group, a leader, or maybe just somebody who emerges, somebody who spots something and is able, through a documentary or a podcast, sort of break into public consciousness and say, wait a minute, stop. Let's examine what's important and how it matters that we hear both sides of this issue.
John was being sworn in as governor. He said, it's our turn. That was the most powerful statements he could make, because he said, it's our turn. I'm taking the responsibility. So hopefully there's another group of people that say, this guy named Richard McLellan, he's long gone, but he was committed to freedom of expression. So am I, and I'm going to do my part. It's my turn.
Everyone is excited about what the McLellan Prize is going to represent, the history that it's going to make, the fellowships that will come as a result also of the McLellan gift. And you start to see where the Kirk Center, based on the legacy of Russell Kirk, is going to have a lasting impact. It's going to be far beyond Mecosta, Michigan, far beyond that library, which is the repository of all of Russell's books and research and writings. It will be the largest prize of its kind in the history that we've had, and it will be something that I think will grow in renown. And I think at some point that the winners of that prize, that's going to really be an assembly of some important people in American history.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. That was beautiful. And I want to welcome everyone here, as Jeff did, and we're so grateful you're here tonight. And I also want to start by just thanking Jeff Nelson and Emily Corbin and the small but mighty staff at the Russell Kirk Center for Cultural Renewal for their support in making this evening such a success. The Kirk Center has been a wonderful, supportive, and welcoming home for the McLellan Prize, and this past year has flown by. But I think of Russell Kirk, he passionately believed that a society that values free speech and civil, I would say, civil behavior, a civil society that can run much more effectively. And when you value that free speech, you that are able to address the challenges and measures that, with some harmony that we often haven't seen in recent years, because individuals become more likely to engage in a respectful and constructive dialogue. And these been challenging times. They are challenging times, but our remarkable jury reviewed many impressive entries before deciding that Greg Lukianoff, through the work, the body of his work, his writings, his incredible leadership, earned the honor of receiving the inaugural Richard McLellan Prize for advancing free speech and expression. We're pleased tonight, we have 3 of our jurors who were able to be here. You'll hear from a couple of them on the panel in a little bit, but Honorable James Ho, he came up, did the pledge, but Judge Ho in the front row. Heather, thank you for being here. A great Spartan in years past, not that many years, but in the past. Susan Goldberg is with us tonight. And Susan, thank you very much for your service. And Heather McDonald also, who noted for many of her writings and work at Manhattan Institute. We are disappointed a couple of our jurors couldn't get in. One became sick, the other's having a knee replaced tomorrow, I think. So, but this was an impressive jury, and we also, I think all of us, extend our heartfelt gratitude to Richard McLellan for his extraordinary generosity in funding the $50,000 annual McLellan Prize and the academic prizes that will also be awarded tonight. These awards not only recognize, but I believe empower champions of free speech, individuals who tirelessly work to protect and promote this vital right. Mr. McLellan's commitment, I think, was pretty evident in the video. Brief though it was, it's inspiring Richard's beliefs, and he backed up with his generosity. The Kirk Center is confident, as Jeff indicated, that the McLellan Prize will be instrumental, I believe, in fostering a society where diverse voices can be heard, not canceled, where ideas can flourish without fear of censorship or retaliation. We were able to recruit such a distinguished jury from across the country, really, because they also share that belief that recognizing leaders like those being honored tonight with the McLellan Prizes are crucial activities that should be undertaken. And I must say, when we started talking about the concept a year ago, or more than a year ago, the prize, a little surprising to learn that there really wasn't anything in existence other than a prize was ordered that had been set up by Hugh Hefner's Foundation on Free Expression. So we thought, Kirk Center could step up here. So the work that's being done here really is, I think, could have a profound impact on supporting and advancing free expression. The recognition also inspires others to stand up for these freedoms, particularly when they're under threat. By celebrating defenders, we honor their courage and dedication while reaffirming our commitment to upholding free speech as a cornerstone of democracy. Public recognition of free speech advocates brings attention to the challenges often that are being confronted, whether those are on a campus or sometimes in a corporation or just in the media, in the community. Those individuals often can face significant opposition, sometimes hostility, and risk personal and professional repercussions. The McLellan Prize underscores the importance of their work. It educates the public about the ongoing battles for free speech. It fosters a more informed and engaged citizenry if we're doing this right, and we believe we are. Acknowledging the leaders then creates a culture of accountability and transparency. It sends a clear message that these are rights that cannot be suppressed without scrutiny. It also encourages more people to take part in defending free speech. Josiah, one of our awardees tonight, and I were talking, said there's a robust movement. It's small, but it's growing. It's going to continue to grow. These prizes will assist. And it also will also not only defend free speech, but also holds the power, I think, to ensure the principles of openness and debate are going to be present for future generations. By celebrating the champions, we contribute to a legacy of vigilance and resilience against censorship and suppression. So finally, I just want to say to all of you who came here tonight, and I know we lost people because of the weather and we were suppressed by extreme weather threats, but you made it out. You overcame. And by joining us here, and Jeff mentioned this, a year ago we were announcing the existence of the prize, and a lot's transpired over the past year. We're deeply grateful to so many who have supported us in this journey, who've come here tonight. And the one thing I'll leave you with is sort of what Jeff said. Anybody who's here tonight is going to be able to tell in the future, your family and your friends, I was at the inaugural McLellan Prizes event. So thank you for being here. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, where we go?
All right, the preliminaries are behind us. On to the awards. We move into this part of the awards part of the evening program. Tonight we award, to begin, our first two free speech writing fellowships of $12,500 for each fellowship. For scholars or journalists, that enables them to work principally through the summer months on a proposed area of free speech studies. This year's recipients include both a distinguished scholar, Samuel Goldman, and an emerging young journalist, Josiah Joner. I'm pleased that Heather McDonald, who many of you know as a New York Times best-selling author and who served as a member of the McLellan Prize jury, will follow me and introduce Josiah. I know from experience, having worked with many hundreds of faculty, conservative and classical liberal faculty through the years, that it's difficult to secure funds, in effect to buy out their summer, so they can complete research and writing projects necessary to move forward in their profession. The McLellan Free Speech Writing Fellowships aim to help writers break through that particular choke point and assist them in producing publishable work that can make a difference in the progression of their careers and add to our understanding of free speech. It is my privilege to present Samuel Goldman with the first McLellan Free Speech Writing Fellowship. Sam is an associate professor of political science at George Washington University, where he also is executive director of the Ambassador John L. Loeb Jr. Institute for Religious Freedom and Democracy. His most recent book, After Nationalism, Being American in a Divided Age, was published by the University of Pennsylvania Press. Sam received his PhD from Harvard and taught at Harvard and Princeton before coming to George Washington. In addition to academic work, his writing has appeared in a number of numerous publications, including the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Sam is one of the most respected scholars of his generation. He has a reputation for brilliance, generosity of spirit, clear and insightful writing, good humor, and among a certain set, for his refined style of attire and his writings on this topic. Very popular on Twitter. His nominator for this award wrote, quote, "Sam's current project addresses conservatives in higher education. The figures in his book treat include Peter Viereck, Russell Kirk, William F. Buckley Jr., Wilmore Kendall, Leo Strauss, and Robert Nisbet. The significance of this work is Goldman's effort to refine strains of conservative treatment of higher education. Many of these authors embraced high culture with an eye to preserving the past, but other conservative figures have taken a more populist approach, regarding higher education as either a fool's errand or a source of moral corruption. While many conservatives have written on higher education, few, if any, have written on conservatives in higher education. And this critical pivot is important for assessing the state of universities in a period when many are closing and others have strayed far from their original missions. The working title of Sam's book project is called Mad Professors. It explores American conservatives' love-hate relationship with the academy since World War II. Initially suspicious of the idea that there's a marketplace of ideas, conservatives came to embrace free speech as an essential part of higher education. He has a book contract with Basic Books, a prominent New York publishing house, and so we'll look forward to his project probably in a year and a half or so. It is my pleasure to award the first Richard D. McLellan Free Speech Writing Fellowship to Dr. Samuel Goldman.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Nelson. I must say that I am only slightly disappointed that you didn't present me with one of the enormous novelty checks that they use on game shows. But nevertheless, I thank you for the wonderful award. It is a great honor to receive this prize from the Kirk Center, not only because of my admiration for their recent initiatives, of which the McLellan Prizes are only one, but also because of my respect for their namesake and presiding spirit, Russell Kirk. Nearly 75 years ago, Dr. Kirk was among the first to perceive the slow-moving disaster that was enveloping America's colleges and universities. In pursuit of a misguided vision of equality, he argued, they were not only lowering intellectual and moral standards, but also expanding themselves beyond any possibility of coherent administration. The religious and republican spirit of the 17th and 18th centuries had expressed itself in the colonial colleges, Kirk observed, while the scientific aspirations of the 19th century came to fruition in the research university. But the 20th century was committed to democracy, and its characteristic educational institution was therefore what he called Behemoth U, where professional credentials, sports, and federal grants all counted for more than humane learning. And I apologize to any Spartans in attendance to remind you that he was talking about Michigan State, where he was briefly employed. Kirk's diagnosis brought him into tension with the liberals of his time, who believed that the benefits of higher education could be infinitely extended without regard for aptitude, preparation, or commitment. Kirk had no objection to equal opportunity for students from humble backgrounds, including himself. But he also knew, as his contemporary Kingsley Amis put it, that in the long run, more means worse. Mass higher education, Kirk warned, could not long remain higher. And over the next several decades, Kirk spent considerable time charting what he called decadence and renewal in the higher learning. I fear that we've seen more decadence than renewal during that time, but there's always the possibility of improvement. But Kirk's analysis of the academic predicament also challenged his fellow conservatives. Against the likes of Wilmore Kendall and William F. Buckley,
Kirk insisted that there could be no academic community worthy of the name without the intellectual and professional freedom to pursue and transmit knowledge, even when that clashed with the preferences of governments, of donors, or the general public. To Kirk, scholars were more than employees, hired to teach particular courses or to engage in particular lines of research. They were what he called guardians of the word, with a distinctive responsibility to themselves, to each other, and above all, to the truth. It's this aspect of Kirk's thought that we honor tonight. This award will allow me to continue work on my book, which, as Dr. Nelson described, will be called Mad Professors, Conservative Academics, and the Battle for the American Mind. I'm afraid that publication will have to wait until 2026, but I have to write it first. So it's coming. And I don't know whether this kind of book counts as higher learning in the sense that Kirk defended. Nevertheless, I do think that it is something to teach us about our current challenges in academia and the polarized society in which we live. And one of the lessons is that the responsibility to preserve the riches of Western civilization is inseparable from the freedom to question, to think, and to write in the service of truth that brought them about in the first place. Once again, I thank Dr. Nelson, Mr. McLellan, and the Kirk Center for this honor. I also thank you for your interest and attention. It has been a wonderful evening so far, and I look forward to the program continuing.
My name is Heather McDonald. It's a great privilege to be here. Tonight we honor Josiah Joner with the McLellan Free Speech Writing Fellowship. Josiah is composing a history of censorship at Stanford University, from which he received his economics BA earlier this year. Do the math. That 2024 graduation date means that Josiah was in college during the height of the COVID pandemic. The COVID years not only generated the regrettable mantra, stay safe, they also ushered in such arbitrary dictates as the 6-foot social distancing rule and the masking of toddlers. You Michigan residents might recall some particularly odd regulations around shopping. This was not under Governor John Engler. Got to get rid of her. To be on any college campus during the COVID breakdown was to experience the safetiest university at its worst. But to be at Stanford was to experience contemporary faculty at their most oppressive. I will let Josiah recount for you Stanford's truth-crushing campaign, a campaign directed against its own professors who had the temerity to question COVID lockdowns. Josiah had a front row seat at that censorship regime. He was the editor-in-chief of the Stanford Review, a student newspaper founded by Peter Thiel in 1987 to provide a skeptical take on campus dogmas. Josiah covered Stanford's war on COVID's free speech with eloquence and a fierce commitment to documenting fact. As importantly, Josiah studied with one of the school's pariah dissidents, Dr. J. Bhattacharya. Dr. Bhattacharya is now the advisor to Josiah's censorship history. Let us hope they have extra time on their hands, since Stanford's troubled history around free speech is long-standing. It was after a morally ambiguous incident at Stanford in 1900 that the concept of academic freedom was born. That concept is now ignored or invoked, depending on the politics of the moment. A professor's dissent regarding so-called systemic racism should be punished, according to faculty and administrators. academic freedom notwithstanding. While support for terror attacks on Israel may not even be criticized. But free time is what Josiah and Dr. Bhattacharya will lack. Since graduating, Josiah has been working for Fox News host Steve Hilton, as Hilton tries to restore the California dream through rational public policy. As a California native, I am grateful to Josiah's efforts on the Golden State's behalf. Perhaps he is motivated by coming from a place even further beyond sanity, Portland, Oregon. Next year, Josiah will be busier still when he starts at a venture capital firm in San Francisco. But I hope he will return to journalism. We need him. As for Dr. Bhattacharya, he will also have his hands full. He would be here tonight to pay tribute to his student, but for a slight scheduling conflict. Among Donald Trump's executive branch nominations, the choice of Dr. Bhattacharya to head the National Institutes of Health is the most thrilling. Dr. Bhattacharya will remove ideology from science and restore its integrity by awarding research grants on the basis of meritocratic accomplishments, not race. It's about time. Dr. Bhattacharya's elevation, dare one call it his revenge, can constitute a concluding chapter in Josiah's censorship history, which for once just might have a happy ending. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Josiah Joner.
Thank you, Heather. First off, I want to thank the Russell Kirk Center and Mr. McLellan himself for establishing this award. It really means so much to me, and I'm so honored to be a part of this inaugural cohort to receive this prize. But I want to especially thank all of you here today, because it's really for your support for the Kirk Center and for this prize that I have the support network and the opportunities to be able to be up here and stand for free speech. So thank you. I started college at Stanford in the fall of 2021, and I can still distinctly remember the way my aunt looked at me when I told her I'd gotten into Stanford. I expected some sort of excitement. I was very excited. Stanford was my dream school, but instead what I got from my aunt was a look of disdain. And I didn't understand it then, but it's much more clear to me now. Our universities, which should garner the highest respect, have instead become some of the most despised institutions in our country. My aunt's sentiment is not unique. It is what I'm sure many of you and so many other Americans feel about the current state of our top universities. I witnessed it firsthand at Stanford. The reason we have awards like the McLellan Fellowship in the first place is because of the assaults on free speech that we see taking place at schools just like Stanford. Just in my time, I watched as the university released the Harmful Language Initiative, which, as you may remember, banned words like American and brave. I called for the university to fire Stanford Law School's Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion when she encouraged and condoned the student protesters shouting down federal judge Kyle Duncan from speaking on campus. And I watched as the double standards of the university unfolded during the pro-Palestine protests on campus. But COVID was where the worst of the assaults on free speech came out of Stanford. Over the past several years, Stanford has become inextricably intertwined with censorship. It has censored not only its own faculty and its students, but it has censored what the average American citizen can hear, can read, and can say. It was Stanford that collaborated with the government and big tech to censor Americans on social media platforms through the Stanford Internet Observatory. And it was Stanford that censured and suspended its own leading faculty members for holding contrarian views. But through those difficult times, Stanford also produced some of the strongest advocates for free speech. The very members who were censored at Stanford stood for what they believed in and stood for free speech. As their positions have gradually become vindicated, Stanford's failures only serve as an example for the necessity of free speech and academic freedom. I'm incredibly grateful to have some of those people as my mentors. They're some of the most courageous leaders and some of the strongest advocates for free speech that I know. And one of them, as Heather mentioned, was my advisor and professor, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, or soon to be NIH director, Dr. Bhattacharya. Can we just have one more round of applause for him? Dr. Bhattacharya nominated me for this award, and I'm just so grateful for him and all that he's done on campus. And another person, Dr. Scott Atlas at Stanford, who I'll be with in Zurich just next week for an international conference for young leaders on defending freedom. Both Dr. Bhattacharya and Dr. Atlas have demonstrated what standing up for free speech truly looks like. But the issue of free speech and academic freedom is nothing new. In fact, as Heather said, Stanford has a long and turbulent history with it. From the very beginning of Stanford's history, the firing of this young professor nearly derailed the university with so much controversy, and it led to the beginning of faculty tenure in the United States. And again at Stanford, the expulsion of a PhD student who documented the forced abortions and sterilizations in China, and the firing of the first tenured faculty member during the Vietnam War protests have repeatedly tested the university's relationship with free speech and academic freedom. The battle to preserve these rights must be won again and again and again. And I'm honored to be receiving the McLellan Award to work on just that. I will be spending this next year writing about what I witnessed at Stanford and how we can restore free speech in our institutions. We live in a rapidly changing world, and a world that is on the verge of changing more rapidly than ever before. The pandemic showed us how important it is to protect the most basic principles of free speech. Our country and our institutions made many mistakes this time around, but whatever crisis comes next might not be as forgiving. Our academic institutions must be the safeguards of free speech, not the opposite. Maybe then will my aunt, maybe yourself, and so many other Americans feel differently about these schools. Thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Luke Sheahan. I'm editor of the University Bookman, published by the Russell Kirk Center. When the search for the Richard D. McLellan Prize for Advancing Free Speech and Expression was announced, I was interested in discovering who the second recipient would be. I still am, because I think we all knew who the first would be. Greg's reputation and accomplishments need little introduction. Among civil libertarians and even the generally aware, they are nearly common knowledge at this point. I first met Greg in 2005, nearly 20 years ago, as a summer intern at what was then a relatively young and small nonprofit, employing fewer than 10 people. Greg gave a great talk on free speech to the 6 of us interning that summer. He was clearly knowledgeable and entertaining. I liked him okay. But then, after I returned to school some months later, he was appointed president. And I thought to myself, really? The goofy guy with the loud laugh? Sure, Greg knew his John Stuart Mill and his free speech case law. He was even funny. But president? What about the entirely unrelated skill set it takes to manage and lead an organization? The ability to network, organize, strategize, fundraise, recognize and cultivate talent, and so on. He knew his case law, but could he anticipate changes in the cultural landscape that would produce new challenges to free speech? I sense no evidence of any of these things. Wouldn't you know it? The members of FIRE's Esteem Board knew more and could see further than a 21-year-old college senior. I don't know how Greg feels about this. Our political leanings are quite different, but looking back on his elevation to president of FIRE only confirms in me my philosophical conservatism. My elders knew better than me. In my defense, I don't believe that even they knew at the time how well they had done. Not only would Greg prove capable as an administrator, cultivator of young talent, an avid spokesman for free speech, but he would become the premier civil libertarian of his generation. As evidence of his leadership talent, or on second thought, perhaps an exception to it, among his first acts was to hire that young, doubting Thomas right out of college. I was fire employee number 9 at 22, the youngest on staff at the time. Greg, at 32, was the oldest at the time, and the only in his 30s. Fire was young in more ways than one. During my first week, Greg and I stayed after hours and polished off a bottle of whiskey. For the first time, it wouldn't be the last. That wasn't the only thing that won that 20-something over. I watched as he carefully cultivated Fire's reputation, grew its donor base, and expanded its reach. Principle, first and foremost, guided his every move. Skepticism turned to admiration. Sometimes us young staffers would speculate about what it would take for Greg to leave Fire, where he was clearly personally and as well as professionally invested. Not a lateral move, but perhaps a higher status position at a larger or more established civil liberties organization, we thought. Thinking back on those conversations now, it's almost silly. Greg's success would foreclose that option. Under Greg's careful stewardship, Fire would become the highest status, most principled, and well-respected civil liberties organization in the game, not just in the higher education space, but now in the world. While doing so, Greg would publish some of the most consequential treatments of free speech in our time, foremost among them, The Coddling of the American Mind with Jonathan Haidt, and The Canceling of the American Mind with Ricky Schlott, identifying, anticipating, and crafting responses to the changing contours of censorship in our present age. So without further ado, I present to you the man of the hour, or more accurately, given our topic today, the man of the century, the inaugural recipient of the Richard D. McLellan Prize for Advancing Free Speech and Expression, my friend and former boss, Greg Lukianoff.
You know, Luke, I initially didn't read your remarks about me. And I'm really glad I did because I would have been so flabbergasted by them. I'm not sure I could have done my own talk. That meant the world to me, so thank you. And thank you so much to the Russell Kirk Center for this extraordinary honor. Thank you to the judges for even considering me. And thank you to one judge in particular, Nadine Strawson, who could not be here tonight due to an injury she suffered in Shanghai. Pretty cool. If you're gonna get hurt somewhere. She's been a hero of mine my entire career, and a younger me would never believe that she's also become someone I get to call a friend. I've dedicated my life to defending not only the First Amendment, but also the older, bolder, more expansive idea of free speech. But if there's one world leader who, if I'm being honest, I can't entirely blame for being frustrated with a press that ceaselessly hammered his personal life, his marriages, his affairs, his sometimes reckless decision-making, his outsized libido, and even his weight. And of course, I'm talking about Henry VIII. And in the press, and the press in question is the printing press, Henry VIII actually started out as a huge fan of the printing press. The Catholic Church dubbed him Defender of the Faith for his writing, in fact, a title he kept using after he turned on the Catholic Church. Honestly, kind of a baller move. But eventually he turned against the widespread use of the printing press. Why? Because the press was disruptive, destabilizing, dangerous. For example, one of the first bestsellers ever printed was 1487's Malleus Maleficarum, a witch hunting manual. This book helped accelerate the European witch trials on a horrifying scale. And how did the book say you could know if someone was a witch? Well, for example, it warned people against eloquent women who argued against received wisdom. I imagine a time-traveling Nadine would have quite a bit to say about that. And the printing press plunged Europe into 2 centuries of bloody religious wars. How do we know? Well, how many people here know who Jan Hus was? Oh, actually, fewer than I would have thought. He was the unlucky cleric who was burned at the stake in Prague in 1415 after he questioned the church. But when Martin Luther tried the same thing 100 years later, he succeeded where Jan Hus failed. And why is that? Because Luther had the power of the press. So yeah, it's easy to understand why a monarch like Henry VIII wanted to crack down on this disruptive technology. It undermined his supremacy and showed precious little respect for the privacy of his romantic life. But all the printing press really did, essentially, was bring more people into the global conversation. Not hundreds of millions, mind you, just millions. And it dramatically increased the velocity of that conversation. It was the first time that freedom of speech was possible on a mass scale. And almost as soon as it was on the scene, people started making a radical argument. An argument for freedom of speech. Free speech is the eternally radical idea. And once millions of eyes started scrutinizing the authorities of the day, they realized a lot of what people thought was true didn't hold up. Its leaders didn't look so great. Especially with the giant turkey leg in his hand that you always saw Henry VIII in the movies. And Europe suddenly realized that in their universe of shared certainty, that had seemed so solid, it was as substantial as a puff of incense. Allowing people to be free to think as they will and say what they think is a radical idea, opposed in every generation. Because it turns out, given a chance, people have some questions for authority. And that is why, as Frederick Douglass put it, free speech is the dread of tyrants. But not just the tyrants of kingdoms or churches, but the tyrants of supposed knowledge. The ones who think all important truths are known, and it just so happens they are the first in history to know them. What luck! Now, fast forward to 2014. We at the Fire started noticing something strange happening on college campuses. Now, it's worth noting that in Fire's now 25-year history, we're 25 years old this year, freedom of speech on campus was never particularly well protected, but around 2014, everything got dramatically worse. As Jonathan Haidt and I described in The Coddling of the American Mind, we saw a wave of unrest and new witch hunts. We cited Emil Durkheim's definition of witch hunt to point out that the cancel culture that had descended on campuses was eerily reminiscent of the earlier hysteria. And once again, targeting many innocent victims, and too often, also the eloquent critics of received wisdom. And at the time, not coincidentally, people across the political spectrum were beginning to lose faith in our experts, our institutions, and even the idea of shared truth itself. What caused this? A new disruptive technology. This time it was social media, a tool that brought billions of people into the global conversation at a velocity almost as fast as human thought. I've been on social media, and sometimes it actually moves a little faster than human thought. And once again, the speed and scale of that disruption led people to question everything. Were our authorities trustworthy? Were our moral certainties just the assertions of those in power? Or were these too a puff of smoke? Now, is my inspiring message tonight, given the parallels to the printing press, that we're headed for another 200 years of bloody conflict? No. The pace of change today is so much faster than it was in the 16th century. At today's pace, a massive transformation could probably happen over a particularly intense 3-day weekend. But the old tyrants of supposed knowledge, the venerated institutions, whether they be universities or what we now call the press, all of which are likewise experiencing institutional decay, increasingly reject free speech. Why? Because free speech has a way of shining a bright light on that decay. Because free speech is an eternally radical idea. And because free speech is the dread of tyrants. But to be fair, just like we tried to be fair-ish to Henry VIII, the disruption we're experiencing now is profound and it's accelerating. And it's tempting to want to stop it, to clamp down, to apply a tourniquet to the flow of information, to stanch the questioning of institutions, to cut off challenges to authority as dangerous and destabilizing. Suddenly, many of these institutions started acting like Henry VIII when he tried to ban all printing presses that he didn't control. I always imagine Henry VIII shouting to the heaven, "Stop calling me fat and randy." It's all perfectly predictable when faced with the eternally radical idea, even when it's stated as simply as everyone is entitled to their opinion. But here's the thing. Disruption always feels scary. It always brings wacky ideas and chaotic periods of epistemic anarchy. Yet what often lies on the other side of that chaos is extraordinary progress. After the chaos of the printing press, we got the Enlightenment. We got the scientific revolution. We got the world's first large-scale democratic republic, which, despite the predictions of even many of its founders, is celebrating 250 years next year. The lesson? When you add millions or billions of eyes to the problems of the world, the result is not just noise, but incredible breakthroughs. What's happening now is why the free and open exchange of ideas will always be radical. Yes, what the future is going to look like seems a lot less clear. Yes, we're living through a crisis of authority. Yes, we're questioning institutions, but those institutions and authorities don't deserve our blind loyalty. And they showed their cards when they went after the eternally radical idea, when they answered the problem of free speech with new speech codes, Byzantine taboos, and cancellations. The institutions and individuals that stand the test of this era will be those that show integrity and principle, those who tell the truth, even when it's inconvenient or unpopular. That's what happened in the Enlightenment. Figures like Voltaire and Diderot, Smith and Hume, Franklin and Madison. It's also what we're seeing on platforms like Substack, where individuals and institutions with integrity and courage are finding new ways to lead. At FIRE, I'm proud to say we are one of those institutions. We've had the courage to be nonpartisan in a partisan world. Through all the tumult, we've defended free speech, free inquiry, and the free press for all, even at the cost of some uncomfortable Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners. Democratic principles become even more essential during a time of crisis, not less. History shows us that these principles are not luxuries. They are the foundations of a successful and dynamic society. The Enlightenment didn't feel like the Enlightenment when it started. It probably felt like blasphemy, heresy, and chaos. And to Henry VIII, probably like quite a bit of nasty gossip. But freedom always feels a little scary. Free speech is the eternally radical idea, after all. And here's a cognitive hack I like to teach my kids. Actually, one name for Benjamin Franklin. You can reconceptualize fear as excitement. So while I don't blame anyone for feeling anxious right now, I hope they feel exhilarated. Because what's happening is thrilling. The chance to re-examine everything we thought we knew. Yes, real freedom of speech is always radical in every generation, but it's a necessary precondition to understanding the world as it really is. You don't stand a chance without it. When this period is over, the institutions and individuals who showed courage and integrity will be the ones that help us rebuild a world where authority has earned our respect, not simply inherited or coerced it. And as history has shown, what comes next might just be a future of brilliance, achievement, and prosperity that might make the difference between Henry VIII's time and today seem like nothing. And as long as people like those honored here tonight keep fighting, like my dear colleagues at FIRE and my heroes like Nadine, and you in the audience tonight, it will be a future of freedom as well. So I know this is a conservative event, but I hope you will all stay eternally radical.
Thank you, Greg. We're now going to move into the final part of the evening. Come on, panelists, come on up. Where's Luke Sheahan? Is he there at the corner? Luke Sheahan is not just the editor of the University, but he's a professor, a young professor at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, and also a widely published author in his own rights. And we have Susan Goldberg joining us on stage. She was mentioned by Governor Engler. Susan is a distinguished member of our jury. She's president and CEO of WGBH, which is the public media company in Boston that is the largest producer of multi-platform content for PBS and NPR. And before that, she was a prize-winning editor of National Geographic for more than 8 years. And I believe you were the first woman editor of the Cleveland Plain Dealer. Is that I'm not okay? That's impressive. But just to be the editor of the Cleveland Plain Dealer is amazing. She's a six-time juror for the Pulitzer Prize. So our ambitions for the Pulitzer Prize are, not ill-founded. We have experience alongside us. So now we'll move to our panel. Dr. Luke Sheahan, you are the host, and carry us forward. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for everyone, again, for being here, and for the panelists. So I'd like just to take us through a colloquial discussion on the threats and promises of the present age. So we could start off with the threats to free speech. Some of these are perennial, of course, human nature being what it is. But are there any that are peculiar to our age?
I would say one of the things I'm the most worried about is that for all of my life, frankly, there was a libertarian ethos that had at least some purchase on both sides of the political fence. There was a sort of more libertarian right, and there was an aspect of the libertarian left, which is what I come from, which is, people like Nadine Strawson, who I mentioned several times, come from that. And what I'm scared about now is that without that aspect, I feel like America to some degree just becomes like every other country in the world. And I mean that in the worst possible way. And right now it is harder as an organization like FIRE to find principled advocates on either side of the political fence. A lot of us who we're finding increasingly our most fervent advocates, the most reliable people, are people who feel completely orphaned in the culture war. But I do think it's hard to maintain freedom of speech if it's ever perceived as a unipolar value, but particularly when it's not valued necessarily on either side. So that's probably the thing that worries me the most on the highest level.
I've been thinking a lot about the New York Times versus Sullivan, which is a famous Supreme Court case from 1964 that established the right to make a mistake and not get sued out of existence if the people you're writing about are powerful public figures, particularly elected officials. And there's been a lot of talk recently about whether this incredibly important decision that protects not just the press, but I would say the right of everyone to question and criticize and to hold people up, famous people, rich people, up to scrutiny. If that gets degraded, if that somehow goes away, then I think we've got a very difficult free speech problem in the country. And as I say, that inhibits freedom of expression for everybody, not just the press.
So
Greg talked in his remarks about the promise of social media and the internet, and I think that's right. There are great advantages, but I worry about the consequences of a society in which everything that any of us says is on the permanent record, is potentially on the permanent record and available to everyone. One of the bulwarks of free speech, not so much as a philosophical principle or a legal right, but as a practice, I think, is the expectation of forgetting. That you can say things that you might say differently under other circumstances or might not say at all, but they'll be limited to your immediate audience and will be forgotten in a day or a week or a month. That's important to free speech for those who are not public figures who are uttering official statements. And I worry, particularly in observing students, that they fear, and quite rightly fear, that they are under oath at all times, and the smallest mistake of judgment or phrasing could lead to their lives being ruined. And again, they're not crazy to worry about that. So again, there are advantages to social media and moving at the speed of thought, and sometimes faster than the speed of thought. But there are risks too, and I wonder if some of the instinctive hostility or reluctance about free speech that Greg describes, especially among younger people, has to do with justified fear of speaking onto the record at all times and in all settings.
What do you think can be done to counter these threats? Or what are some actions we could take now to preempt them in some way, counter them? This is a very broad question, and I mean it in the absolute broadest sense. The founding of institutions, the passing of legislation.
I mean, the simplest problem to address is defending New York Times v. Sullivan, and all of us should do that. I think people really underestimate how much we rely, every American relies actually on that decision, and I think the alternative history that we'll create if it's gone is not one that people really underestimate how bad it would actually be if that went away. And we were seeing moments of sort of bipartisan agreement that New York Times v. Sullivan was bad, and which I think is just completely insane. So I think the coming together to defend New York Times v. Sullivan is the easiest one.
Well, I do think there's a real thread around that, as I mentioned, but I think we need to do a much better job of educating people about the First Amendment. I mean, most people can't name the 5 freedoms. If you ask people in a poll about freedom of speech or freedom of the press, a lot of people go, well, that's a bad idea. And I don't think people really understand how much the best parts of our society have flourished because of that. And we in the media, and I've spent my entire life as a journalist, have done a really rotten job of educating people and helping people understand, and we really need to do a better job about that.
Well, we educators haven't done any better a job, so don't apologize for journalists.
Oh, I did want to. It wasn't expecting me quite that fast. We are doing quite a bit of work educating young people about free speech. We're just telling them the worst possible lessons in the world about it. And I talk about this. This used to be the way I would open up my talks when I would talk to high school students. Is that, guys, you're being taught the 3 Bs. You're being taught that free speech is the argument of the bully, and I have Nelson from The Simpsons, the bigot, and I have Cartman from South Park, and the robber baron, and I have Kingpin from Marvel. And you're being taught that these are the 3 people who benefit from freedom of speech, and that's a lie. Because rich people, powerful people do just fine because they're rich and powerful. And the bully and the bigot get to decide what's what in a democracy if they have the vote. You literally only need a special protection for freedom of speech for minority points of view and those unpopular with people in power. They have never heard this before. Now, what's crazy, though, is I now have to give this when I give law school talks. because they've been so miseducated. They really do think that free speech is historically the argument of the bad guy. So not only do we have to actually do a better job of teaching about it, we have to actually teach correct lessons about it, because we are teaching a ton about it. It's just all bad.
What sort of positive movements do you see? Founding of institutions comes to mind as there's a founding of kind of a new Lyceum movement. So people will be having, like the old Lyceum debates of the 19th century, and reviving those, so people are seeing productive civil conversations and debates along the same lines, but on a widespread basis again. That's just an example, but what sort of things might be positive movements? I think we've all seen the negative movements. I was quite surprised when I give my free speech hypothetical in my con law class, and I just took it for granted. I thought the students would all obviously take the side of free speech, and very few of them do, for the reasons you just laid out. And it surprised me quite a bit how much I'd have to just correct their basic case law we had just read to get them on the right track. But what might be positive, though, we're saying?
I think a lot of people, for different reasons, are pissed off at the overwhelming suppression of speech, especially related to COVID. And we heard a little bit about that earlier this evening. The effects, as is often the case with movements to suppress ideas, I think that was probably counterproductive in the long run. And there seems to be an immune reaction sort of built into the polity that has raised the salience of these issues, and I think made more people more sympathetic to arguments about free speech than they were even just a few years ago. It's not dominant yet, but I do think, and I'd be interested to hear if Greg has observed anything similar, that there is some reversal of the pendulum on this.
Yeah, I definitely have two different opinions on this. One is, after doing this for now 23 years, putting all the data together with Ricky Schlott for canceling the American mind, it left me incredibly depressed, because there is no period in American history that you can point to, and I'm including McCarthyism here, where more professors have been fired for their speech. 1 in 6 professors say they've either been punished for their speech or actually punished. That's like 100,000 professors. There is no historical comparison for this. So things got really bad. Now, when I was promoting the book, I ended up being on Bill Maher's show, and he said something pretty funny, which was that, as bad as October 7th was, one positive thing that came out of it was that nobody thinks there's nothing wrong on campuses anymore. And that's true. But I'm hearing this sense that from some people, it's like, oh, well, political correctness, that was crazy, and that was like 85 to 95, and we got over that, and the pendulum swung back. And I always have to point out, that's actually bad history. Everything got way worse after 95, just the media stopped paying attention to it. So I think we are badly underestimating how big the reform needs to be, about how much we have damaged the institutions that help us understand what the world actually looks like. And I'm going to be very grave about this issue. I have not seen a single hot button issue in the United States where I don't know of students or professors who have not been punished, if not, or for professors, fired or suspended for being on the wrong side of that. When you add that to every other conformity-inducing pressure, there is every reason in the world why, when Americans are asked to trust our expert class, they shouldn't on any issue that has any political valence whatsoever. And these days, most issues have political valence. So I know I was supposed to say something positive, but what I'm saying is, we really have to think hard on ways, on bigger reforms that are even currently on the table.
I know this was supposed to be positive, but I was about to say the same thing. But I think a lot about the job of the press in a time like this, and I'm really proud of the institutions that I've worked for, and I'm aware that they're media organizations that do a great job and there's media organizations that do a terrible job. I think I've mostly worked for media organizations that do a great job and that work incredibly hard to try to get it right. But man, we are making it harder every day to be a legitimate seeker of the truth and of facts. And I am very worried about what could happen to the Freedom of Information Act. Could it be even harder for people to get information? I'm incredibly worried about the demonization of the press that has occurred, this whole enemy of the people refrain. I'm incredibly worried about the violence that people in the press face in just going about doing their jobs. And I'm incredibly worried about the threats of retribution, imprisonment, investigation, about people trying to exercise their rights as legitimate members of the press to help make the public more informed. And people can either agree or disagree with how those stories are, but man, we got to have people reporting and doing that work to live in the country that I think we all want to live in. I know, that was supposed to be happy.
So I think they misunderstood the assignments. So I think I largely agree. We know that there's declining trust in our institutions.
Wait. Something positive did occur to me. One thing, University of Austin, the fact that people really are trying to start new institution from scratch, I think is absolutely phenomenal. And I talk a lot about sort of micro-credentialing. Basically, like, it's funny because, like, in a book where we talk so much about reforming, people think we're going to end by talking about, like, little Band-Aid solutions for reforming higher ed. And I'm like, the very first thing that needs to happen is way, way, way fewer jobs should require a BA in the first place.
Any other positive things that we might think about? We've got some, the new institutions are really exciting, and they seem to be doing, from Twitter, extremely well. And I think for reasons that are fairly obvious, they're doing what the other institutions have ceased to do. Is there anything else that would leave us on a good note before we start watching some football?
I would say one other thing. I think we're really underestimating young people, that we're not, everybody does, I think, this with every generation. They're not paying any attention. Oh my gosh, their attention spans are so short. They're just not getting it. They don't care. I would say that the young people that I deal with and that we try to seek out for stories, they really care and they're really engaged. I don't really understand exactly how it's going to work to get news stories on Twitter, but there was a time, I meant on TikTok, but there was a time when people didn't understand how that would work on the radio or on television or on every time there's a technology change, the older people are always wringing their hands and, getting upset. So I would just say that the young people who we go seek out their views, they really care. They want to live in a great country. They want to be engaged citizens. They want to know what's going on. And so I would say that's actually a positive and we should give them the benefit of the doubt.
Now this is a question maybe I should have opened with. It's more philosophical, I guess. Free speech is famously defended by John Stuart Mill in the 19th century, and that essay has gotten criticism. I had a professor in college who was a huge fan of the conclusions that John Stuart Mill comes to, but he had this great line that said, John Stuart Mill is proof that you don't have to be a great philosopher to be a great liberal philosopher.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry. Every critic of John Stuart Mill is not as intelligent as John Stuart Mill. Anytime anyone brings this up, I'm kind of like, John Stuart Mill spoke Greek at 3.
That's true.
No offense to your professor, but a little bit of offense to your professor.
What might be some in the scholarship, is there anything that's that ought to get more attention? I've written on conservative defenses, drawing from Michael Oakeshott, Russell Kirk, Robert Nisbet, names familiar, I think, in this room, and using kind of their presuppositions and philosophical arguments to defend broad and strong protections for free speech. But are there ways in which the bolstering of the free speech and free press can come from different quarters than we're accustomed to?
Well, since those are some of the figures I'm writing about in my book, I don't have a good answer. I'm not. It's the same corners that you're describing. But one area of interest for me that's worth exploring are some of the traditional religious defenses of free speech and conscience that have largely been forgotten, and that are important also for, I think, counteracting the impression that Greg describes, that free speech is sort of a weapon of the powerful to enforce their will. That hasn't been true historically, and it's often been members of dissenting religious minorities that have developed very, very powerful defenses of free speech on religious terms, not from the kind of secular liberalism that Mill represents so well.
I mean, my favorite philosophers are always people who think in terms of structures that work. So I'm a big fan of Karl Popper. I'm obviously a big fan of Mill. Big fan of James Madison, who I think is an amazing, philosopher in his own right. But also John Locke. And a lot of my favorite writing at the moment that's in the scholarship is coming from ways to improve, because we need big solutions that exist entirely outside of the academy. It is one of my big takeaways here. But there are things that you can do within the academy that could actually improve things quite a bit. And some of the ideas include things like adversarial collaboration, like the idea of making it more the norm than not, that essentially scholarship should be two scholars who actually disagree with each other working together on a way to prove who was right or wrong. Actually harness the power of adversarial relationships like we have in the law to actually get closer to the truth. Because, basically it's because there's so little viewpoint diversity in higher ed, you have to kind of you have to actually seek it out on purpose. But it can actually potentially be a wonderful tool for advancing knowledge. And I think we have to think in terms of structures. Peer review is completely broken. Institutional review boards are gone. But there are deep thinkers out there, and philosophers and sociologists and psychologists who are thinking about ways to actually create systems that work better. And every single one of them, just like every First Amendment lawyer, are engaging in rock solid, or oftentimes rock solid, epistemology.
Well, I'm not a member of the Academy, and I'm not a First Amendment scholar, but I am a practitioner. And so when I really think about this, I am excited that we're starting to have in journalism a conversation again about objective truth. For a while, this kind of became a dirty word, especially I think among younger journalists who said there could actually be no objective truth. But there is actually objective truth, and you can strive like crazy to find it in your stories every single day. And it doesn't mean false equivalence. It means going where the facts lead you. It means starting out with an open mind of a spirit of true inquiry. It doesn't mean, just finding the facts that you wanted to find because you had already decided what your story was before you left the office. So I really think that there's been a lot of discussion, again in journalism, about getting back to this as just rock solid bedrock principles of how we need to do our jobs. And I don't know if this is going to change how people feel about the press. If you look at polls, people don't believe in institutions anymore, a lot of them, including in the press. But I just think that one story at a time, one organization at a time, we've got to try to rebuild that and work from a common set of shared facts about what's going on. People can draw different conclusions with that information, but how do we get back to some level of agreement that this rug is gray?
this may be one of the areas, too, where there's an educational task, because I think that a lot of the criticisms of objectivity that you describe come from a misunderstanding of what it means, which is not perfection or not making mistakes or not having any bias whatsoever, but rather being transparent about sources and methods, making sure that information is accessible so people can go and try to see the thing you saw, and to use methods that would lead to a reproducible conclusion. If you look at the same evidence in the same way, you will get to the same answer. That's what objectivity means in scholarship, and I think also in journalism. It doesn't mean the sort of view from nowhere that is then rejected. And explaining that is an educational task, and it's one that we have not been particularly good at undertaking.
Can I just say one other thing? I'm so glad you mentioned the transparency aspect of this, because that might be a way that we can do things differently. When I was coming up in journalism, and I'm going to be 65 in a couple of days from now, and so I've been doing this a really long time, but when I was coming up in journalism, you didn't want people to understand how you did things. It was supposed to be like this magical thing that just was, ta-da, here's our great story. Now I think we correctly have come to a place that's completely different. It's like, yes, look at the interviews. Look, on our Frontline show, we produce Frontline for PBS. And on Frontline, you can go back, and if you have the time or interest, you can look at all of the interviews that ended up making their way into an edited show. But you can see that original source material. And more, I think, all kinds of news organizations are trying to create that transparency about who were the sources, who were the people reporting it, how did they go about doing their work. And I hope that that too can help rebuild that trust.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks to the panel. That was a really interesting. I just want to say, in case any of you have some of the concerns that Sam Goldman did, that we didn't have a good housekeeping big cardboard check, $50,000 to give. We did arrange, as soon as Greg touched that master craftsman who produced etched glass, $50,000 magically transferred to your account. Just the touching of the glass. So that's how it happened. It did happen.
All Bitcoin.
And actually, if you're interested, it's very a lot of thought went into the creation of the first McLellan board. We have an architect and a painter and a master glass etchman all in the Washington, D.C. area that produced it for us. So there's a little description on it in your program. So, if you take a look at that, and maybe if you'd like to look at it either here or in the reception room afterwards, it'll be there for your viewing. But I want to thank you all for braving the elements and coming out tonight and participating in this inaugural McLellan Prize program. I of course, want to thank our staff, especially Emily Corwin, who worked so tirelessly with me over the last year on this program. Chris Marling, who's been around, our communications manager. Cecilia Kirk Nelson for her operations and publication support. My academic program officer working, spent a lot on micro-credentials, by the way. Daryl Falkenberg has been around and helped a lot, and Kathleen Mulder for a great planning assist. So thank you all, the hard work leading my staff. I also want to thank the Board of Trustees, the Russell Kirk Center, chaired by T. Kenneth Cripp Jr., who's with us here tonight from Spartanburg. Many of you know Ken and his distinguished alum of the Reagan administration. He's been doing yeoman's work these days with Federalist Society to help with their transition. Ken's a trustee and a counselor, a long-time collaborator with Federalist Society. Governor Engler, of course, our vice chair, is the visionary behind this prize program. Kevin Shields, who I hope some of you meet as our treasurer, indispensable treasurer and managing director. Dr. Benjamin Lockhart, who many of you know from his time at Grand Valley State University here, Father David Corey, Michael Maybach, Roger Kimball, and Justice Stephen Markman are all with us. We've got a board meeting tomorrow, and hopefully I'll be with you next year. But I won't know for sure until after the meeting. Thanks for the Board of Trustees for all their leadership guidance. And finally, many thanks to the terrific group of volunteers, many of them students here tonight. We missed out on a big group from Hope College and the Markets and Morality program that we collaborate a lot with there because of the snowstorm. They're getting maybe 8 inches or so tonight, so we pray for them. We also have a special intention for a supporter and a friend who had a heart attack last night and wasn't able to be with us here. So just an intention in my prayers, and I hope you'll join me with that tonight for her. Students from Calvin University were here, though. Some Ford fellows from the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. We have volunteers from the 616 service group, which has been great working with Nate Gillespie and Sam Jacobs on that. And also a shout out to the Aquinas guys, Andrew and Christopher Curry, who stepped in and filled the gap for all those Holland kids who didn't show. So thank you to the volunteers tonight that helped out so much. And also to the patient and very talented team at the Amway Grand here who worked with us all together tonight. I now invite you. We'll be adjourned until the second annual McLellan Prize program. And now invite you to join us for a dessert reception. There was mention of a football game, so we'll just leave it with Viva free speech and go Lions.